What is true solitude? In our fast-paced, hyper-connected world, the idea of being alone is often feared or misunderstood. We tend to think of solitude as a form of isolation, loneliness, or emotional deprivation. It is commonly perceived as a state of lacking something essential. But have you ever paused to ask yourself, what is true solitude? Is it simply the absence of others? Or could it be something far more profound? From a Buddhist perspective, solitude is not a form of deprivation. Rather, it is an opportunity, a profound invitation to return to our true selves. It's a moment to disconnect from the external noise and distractions, and to explore the depths of our inner world. Solitude is not about being alone. It is about being with yourself in the purest sense, beyond the roles you play or the identities you've constructed. It is a doorway to profound self-awareness and spiritual awakening. Solitude in Buddhist philosophy, not about lack, but return to true self. In Buddhism, the concept of solitude holds a transformative power. It is not viewed as a punishment or a sign of lacking connection, but as an essential part of spiritual practice and self-discovery. It's about creating the space to turn inward, to reconnect with our deepest truths, and to experience life without the constant distractions of the outside world. The life of the Buddha serves as a powerful example of this concept. Siddhartha Gautama, born into a life of privilege, chose to leave behind his royal comforts in search of something deeper. He ventured into the wilderness, living in solitude for many years, far from being an act of resignation or despair. His solitude was a conscious choice, a return to simplicity and stillness. It was through this solitude that the Buddha came to realize the nature of suffering and the path to its cessation. In this way, solitude in Buddhism is not about escaping from the world, but rather about returning to it from a place of greater clarity. It is the space where we can truly understand the nature of our minds, our cravings, our attachments, and our aversions. It is in solitude that we come face to face with our true selves, without the distractions or distortions of external influences. Solitude is also a space for deep spiritual practice. Without the constant noise of the world, we can engage in mindfulness, meditation, and reflection, practices that lead us toward awakening. It is in this quiet space that we learn to observe our thoughts, our breath, and our emotions with mindfulness and equanimity. The path of awakening requires us to face ourselves directly, and solitude is where we find the clarity to do so. The difference between solitude and emotional emptiness. However, there is an important distinction to be made between solitude in the Buddhist sense and what we might call emotional emptiness. While solitude in Buddhist practice is a form of liberation and self-discovery, emotional emptiness often refers to a sense of loneliness, disconnection, or a feeling of being empty inside. This type of emptiness arises from unfulfilled emotional needs, unresolved suffering, or a deep sense of inadequacy. Emotional emptiness can lead to suffering. It is born from attachment, our cravings for external validation, or our desire for something to fill the void we feel inside. This form of emptiness is a source of pain because it is rooted in an ongoing sense of lack. We feel like something is missing, and we search outside ourselves to fill that gap. But no external object or relationship can truly satisfy this emptiness. In contrast, the solitude that Buddhism encourages is not about escaping from something or filling a void. It is about returning to wholeness. When we embrace solitude in the Buddhist way, we do not seek to escape or avoid discomfort. Instead, we turn toward our inner world with acceptance and mindfulness, seeking to understand our true nature. Through this process, we move beyond the feeling of emptiness and discover the profound peace that lies within. 1. Finding the self through solitude. Solitude as a meditation practice, silence to achieve self-awareness. In Buddhist philosophy, solitude is not just the absence of company or activity. It is a deep, intentional practice aimed at self-discovery and mindfulness. When we are alone, free from external distractions, we can engage in a form of meditation that helps us observe our mind with clarity. Meditation, in its most essential form, is the practice of being fully aware of the present moment without attachment, judgment, or resistance. Through solitude, we create the conditions for this mindfulness to flourish. It is in these quiet moments that we learn to connect with ourselves on a deeper level. Just as a clear pond reflects the sky without distortion, our minds become clearer when we remove the distractions of the world. In solitude, we can more easily notice our thoughts, our patterns, and our emotional responses, allowing us to see them as transient and impermanent. The Buddhist teachings stress that true freedom comes from understanding the nature of our thoughts and emotions, not by being swept away by them. When we practice meditation in solitude, we create space to observe the flow of our mind without interference. This space of silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back to us our deepest self, free from the noise of external influence. Over time, we come to recognize that our true self is not the same as our thoughts, fears, or desires. We are the awareness that perceives them, and this awareness is constant, unchanging, and at peace. Connecting solitude to the Dharmakaya, realizing the eternal nature of ourselves through silence and seclusion. In Buddhist teachings, one of the most profound concepts is that of the Dharmakaya, or the truth body. This represents the ultimate, formless, eternal essence of all beings, the true nature of ourselves beyond ego and illusion. The Dharmakaya is beyond time, space, and any kind of conceptualization. It is the inherent wisdom and clarity that is shared by all beings, which exists as a potential within each of us. Solitude, when approached with mindfulness, becomes a gateway to realizing this eternal nature. In a world filled with noise, it is easy to forget that there is something deeper than the surface-level thoughts and emotions we experience daily. But in the quiet of solitude, we are able to touch something timeless. It is in this stillness that we can start to experience our connection to the Dharmakaya, the unchanging essence of all things. Through sustained meditation and deep reflection, we can gradually recognize that our true self is not the temporary collection of thoughts, emotions, or identities that we often mistake ourselves for. Instead, we are that underlying awareness, which is eternal, vast, and interconnected with all beings. In solitude, we transcend the illusion of separateness and realize our profound unity with the universe. Example from the life of the Buddha: enlightenment through silence and solitude under the Bodhi tree. A powerful illustration of the transformative power of solitude is found in the life of the Buddha himself. The story of Siddhartha Gautama's journey to enlightenment is a story of profound solitude. After years of searching for answers in the external world, through indulgence, asceticism, and self-deprivation, he realized that true peace could only be found within. Under the Bodhi tree, in the stillness of his solitary meditation, Siddhartha faced his deepest fears, doubts, and attachments. For days, he sat in complete silence, allowing himself to experience the full range of his thoughts and emotions without clinging to them. In that solitude, he reached enlightenment. It was in the silence and stillness that he came to realize the truth of impermanence, suffering, and the non-self. He understood that all things are interconnected and that freedom comes not from external circumstances, but from an inner awareness of our true nature. The Buddha's example shows us that through solitude, we are not abandoning the world, but instead, reconnecting with it on a deeper level. It is through the peace of solitude that we can touch the highest truth, just as the Buddha did under the Bodhi tree. Solitude, when practiced mindfully, becomes a path to inner freedom, self-realization, and ultimately, spiritual awakening. 2. Independence and freedom in Buddhist philosophy expanded. Independence is not isolation but liberation from material suffering. To understand Buddhist independence, it is essential to first clarify the difference between isolation and freedom. Many people mistakenly equate independence with withdrawing from the world, cutting ties with others, or living in complete solitude. However, this view misses the deeper truth of Buddhist teachings on independence. In Buddhism, independence does not mean living in isolation from society or abandoning our roles and responsibilities. It means finding liberation from the dependency on external circumstances, possessions, and desires. those things that are impermanent and ultimately beyond our control. It is not about detaching from life, but rather, it is about cultivating a mindset that is not bound by the transient nature of worldly phenomena. Take, for example, the concept of upadana, clinging or attachment, in Buddhist philosophy. Attachment to material things, such as wealth, social status, or even relationships, keeps us locked in a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. We depend on these things for our sense of happiness and identity. Yet, the Buddha teaches that everything in life is subject to change. Wealth can be lost, relationships can dissolve, and health can deteriorate. When we rely on external sources for happiness, we are bound to experience suffering as these things come and go. True independence is therefore found not in rejecting the world, but in understanding that the external world is not where our true happiness lies. It is about releasing our grip on the things that we think we need in order to be happy, and instead, focusing on cultivating inner peace and wisdom. Through meditation, mindfulness, and the development of wisdom, we come to realize that true contentment arises from within, not from the external world. Thus, Buddhist independence is freedom from mental clinging. We can live fully in the world, engage in relationships, enjoy life's pleasures, and fulfill our responsibilities. But without the attachment that causes suffering, we learn to see everything with equanimity, not letting ourselves become overly attached to what is temporary, fleeting, or outside our control. The relationship between freedom and enlightenment. True freedom comes from releasing the ego. In Buddhism, the ultimate freedom is the freedom from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, which is known as samsara. The key to this freedom is the realization of nirvana, a state of liberation from the suffering caused by attachment, desire, and ignorance. This liberation comes when we realize that the sense of a permanent, separate self is an illusion. The Buddha's teachings emphasize that our suffering is rooted in the mistaken belief in a permanent self, Atman, a self that is distinct and separate from everything else. This false sense of self is what leads us to cling to things, our possessions, our relationships, our identity, and to become attached to them as if they define who we are. The ego creates a boundary between ourselves and the world, fostering the illusion that we are separate from others, that we must constantly protect and assert our individuality. However, the Buddha taught that the self is not a fixed entity. It is, in fact, a collection of ever-changing thoughts, sensations, and experiences. The belief in a permanent, unchanging self is what keeps us trapped in the cycle of suffering. We constantly chase after things, seeking happiness, validation, and security because we think that these external things will somehow satisfy our true self. But in doing so, we perpetuate our suffering. True freedom, according to the Buddha, is the freedom from this false self. When we let go of the ego, the sense of a separate, independent self, we realize that we are not isolated beings, but part of a vast, interconnected whole. This understanding brings a deep sense of peace, for it dissolves the constant striving and the fear of loss that come with attachment to a separate self. Releasing the ego does not mean losing individuality or becoming a passive, disengaged person. It means recognizing that we are not defined by our desires, thoughts, or external circumstances. When we release attachment to the ego, we free ourselves from the constant pressure to prove our worth or attain something outside of ourselves. This is when true freedom arises, not from acquiring things, but from realizing that we are already complete. The role of the self in the path to liberation. Buddhist teachings remind us that the path to enlightenment is a journey of self-discovery. The more we understand the nature of the self and its impermanence, the less we become attached to it. As we walk the path of liberation, we learn to relinquish the need to control or cling to any part of our experience, allowing us to embrace the present moment with equanimity. We can act in the world, work, love, and engage with others, but with the understanding that our true essence is not tied to these external roles or achievements. In this sense, freedom and enlightenment go hand in hand. The more we let go of the false self, the more we realize that we are already free. We stop identifying with the transient aspects of our lives, the roles we play, the possessions we own, or the achievements we seek, and begin to identify with the timeless, unchanging awareness that underlies all experience. This realization of freedom is not an abstract concept. It is a lived experience that transforms the way we interact with the world. It is the freedom to live authentically, to love without attachment, and to experience life with a sense of peace and acceptance. True freedom is not about escaping the world, but about engaging with it from a place of clarity and inner peace. Applying the Eightfold Path to live freely and independently. In the Buddha's teachings, the Eightfold Path provides a practical guide to achieving both freedom and independence in our lives. It is a set of principles and practices that help us cultivate wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. The Eightfold Path teaches us how to live in alignment with our true nature, transcending the attachments that bind us to suffering. 1. Right view. Understanding the true nature of reality, seeing that everything is impermanent, interdependent, and lacking a permanent self. When we adopt this view, we free ourselves from the attachments that cause suffering. 2. Right intention. Cultivating intentions that are rooted in compassion, kindness, and wisdom. By setting our intentions in alignment with these qualities, we create the conditions for freedom to arise. 3. Right speech. Speaking truthfully and kindly, avoiding gossip, harsh words, and lies. This helps to maintain peace in our interactions and supports our mental clarity. 4. Right action. Acting in ways that are ethical and beneficial to others, avoiding harm. By acting with integrity, we free ourselves from the burdens of guilt and regret. 5. Right livelihood. Choosing a profession or way of life that is in harmony with our values, avoiding work that causes harm to others. This ensures that we are not dependent on actions that perpetuate suffering. 6. Right effort. Cultivating a disciplined mind through regular practice, striving to overcome negative habits and cultivate wholesome qualities. 7. Right mindfulness. Being fully present in the moment, cultivating awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and actions without attachment or aversion. This practice helps to free us from the distractions that cause suffering. 8. Right concentration. Developing deep concentration through meditation, which leads to mental clarity and insight into the true nature of reality. By incorporating these principles into our daily lives, we can experience true freedom, not by escaping the world, but by transforming the way we relate to it. The Eightfold Path shows us how to live with wisdom and compassion, creating the conditions for independence and liberation. 3. Connection through solitude, not disconnection, but a deeper connection. The relationship between solitude and compassion. How understanding solitude cultivates compassion and connection to all beings. At first glance, solitude may seem like a state of disconnection. Being alone often brings up feelings of isolation or loneliness. But in Buddhist philosophy, solitude is viewed as an opportunity to deepen our connection to ourselves and, ultimately, to others. It is through solitude that we begin to understand the true nature of interdependence, the interconnectedness of all things. The Buddha taught that all beings are interconnected, and our suffering is not merely our own, but a part of the larger collective human experience. Solitude, far from being a retreat into isolation, becomes an invitation to connect with this collective experience on a deeper level. In stillness, we can reflect on the shared nature of suffering and the interwoven fabric of all living beings. When we understand the nature of our own suffering and how it relates to the suffering of others, we develop a profound sense of compassion. This is the essence of Karu, the Buddhist practice of compassion. Compassion arises when we recognize that we are not alone in our struggles. All beings, whether human, animal, or even sentient beings in different realms, experience pain and suffering. By embracing solitude and confronting our own suffering, we become more attuned to the suffering of others. As we deepen our understanding of ourselves in solitude, we expand our capacity for compassion. Solitude thus becomes a practice of listening, not only to our inner thoughts and feelings, but also to the silent cries of others. It allows us to cultivate an awareness of the interconnectedness of all beings and encourages us to reach out with compassion, not from a place of pity or superiority, but from an authentic understanding of shared human experience. The silence of the mind expands compassion, not just caring for ourselves, but caring for the world around us. One of the most profound aspects of solitude is the opportunity to cultivate inner silence and stillness. In our busy world, it is easy to become overwhelmed by external noise, the demands of work, relationships, and the constant bombardment of information. This external noise often prevents us from hearing the quieter, more subtle sounds of our hearts and minds. Through meditation and mindfulness practices in solitude, we allow ourselves the space to quiet the mind. In this stillness, we can experience what the Buddha described as the mind of equanimity, a state of mind that is calm, balanced, and free from the turbulence of emotional reactions. It is in this place of mental tranquility that compassion can arise most fully. When our minds are quiet, we no longer react impulsively to the suffering of others. Instead, we can respond with awareness and clarity. This mental stillness doesn't mean detachment or indifference. Rather, it is a state of deep connection to the present moment, to our own feelings, and to the feelings of others. From this space, we are able to extend compassion in a more genuine and effective way. Just as we care for ourselves in our moments of solitude, we begin to care for the world around us. Compassion is not a limited resource. The more we give, the more it grows. Through practices such as meditation, mindfulness, and loving kindness, metta, we can extend our heart to all beings, seeing their suffering as our own. This connection to all living beings, fostered in the quietude of solitude, deepens our ability to serve others and act with kindness in our daily lives. How to practice compassion and connect with the community while living alone. Living alone, while a practice of solitude, does not equate to living in isolation. In fact, it can be the very condition that allows us to connect more deeply with others, but in a way that is mindful, intentional, and compassionate. Buddhism teaches that our actions, speech, and thoughts should all be imbued with compassion. When we live alone, we have the freedom to cultivate a deep, ongoing practice of compassion, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us. Here are a few ways to integrate compassion and connection into a solitary lifestyle. 1. Mindful communication. Even when living alone, we can still practice mindful communication with others. This can be through phone calls, video chats, or simple messages. The key is to be present in these interactions, truly listening, and offering words of kindness and encouragement. In this way, our solitary moments don't isolate us. Instead, they give us the space to be fully present with others. 2. Volunteering and service. Even when living alone, one can find numerous ways to contribute to the community and serve others. Volunteering is an excellent way to connect with people, not from a place of obligation, but from a space of genuine compassion. Whether it's helping at a local charity, supporting a friend, or simply participating in community events, these acts of kindness create bonds that transcend physical proximity. 3. Loving kindness meditation. One of the most powerful practices to foster compassion is through metta meditation, or the meditation of loving kindness. In this practice, we focus on sending love and well-wishing to others, starting with ourselves and expanding outward to friends, family, acquaintances, strangers, and even those we may consider enemies. This meditation fosters a deep sense of connection with the world, regardless of our physical isolation. 4. Practicing gratitude. By taking time to reflect on the good in our lives and expressing gratitude, we build a sense of connection to the people and the world around us. Gratitude reminds us of the interconnectedness of all things and helps us recognize the many ways we are supported, even in solitude. 5. Building relationships with the self. Ultimately, when we live alone, we have the opportunity to develop a strong relationship with ourselves. Self-compassion, being kind, patient, and understanding with our own struggles becomes the foundation from which we can extend compassion to others. When we are kind to ourselves, we can be more compassionate toward others. seeing them as reflections of ourselves. Through these practices, we can turn our solitude into a fertile ground for spiritual growth and connection, nurturing both our own well-being and that of others. 4. The journey of enlightenment through solitude and living fully. Enlightenment and liberation. The importance of solitude in nurturing wisdom and awakening the mind. In Buddhist philosophy, enlightenment, bodhi, is the ultimate goal, the realization of our true nature and the liberation from suffering. But how can solitude play a role in this profound transformation? The answer lies in the fact that solitude provides a unique opportunity for deep contemplation and inner work. It is in the quiet moments of aloneness that we can reflect on the true nature of our existence, question the illusion of our ego, and begin to awaken to the deeper wisdom that resides within us. Solitude allows us to step back from the distractions and attachments of the external world. In the absence of constant noise and activity, we create space for the mind to settle and gain clarity. This stillness is essential for cultivating prajna, the wisdom that comes from direct insight into the nature of reality. Without this clarity, we remain entangled in the cycle of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, caught in our desires, fears, and attachments. The Buddha himself sought solitude under the Bodhi tree, away from the distractions of the world, to meditate and achieve enlightenment. It was in this quiet space that he gained profound insights into the nature of suffering, the causes of suffering, and the path to liberation. His enlightenment came not through external achievements or possessions, but through an inward journey of deep introspection and self-awareness. Thus, solitude is not just a retreat from the world, but a path to spiritual awakening. It is a fertile ground for the growth of wisdom, where we can begin to understand the impermanent nature of all things, the interconnectedness of life, and the profound peace that lies beyond the fluctuations of the mind. By spending time alone, we can nurture the seeds of prajna and move closer to the realization of our true nature. Entering the inner world. How solitude helps us liberate ourselves from worldly attachments and live a peaceful, contented life. Living in the world, we are constantly confronted with distractions, the demands of work, the expectations of others, the pursuit of material wealth, and the never-ending cycle of desire. These external pressures create a veil that obscures our true self, making it difficult to connect with the inner peace that resides within us. Solitude offers us a chance to break free from these distractions and reconnect with our deeper self. By embracing solitude, we can learn to let go of the attachments that tie us to worldly concerns. We begin to realize that true freedom does not come from external accomplishments or possessions, but from a peaceful, undisturbed mind. The more we practice solitude, the more we discover that the key to a contented life lies in cultivating inner peace and letting go of our need for external validation. In the stillness of solitude, we also encounter the reality of impermanence. The Buddha taught that everything in life is fleeting, our emotions, our thoughts, and even our lives. When we truly understand this, we stop clinging to the things we believe will make us happy, and we begin to appreciate life for what it is in the present moment. Solitude, therefore, helps us live more mindfully, recognizing that happiness does not come from attachment, but from acceptance of the moment as it is. Through this process of inner liberation, we are able to live a life that is not controlled by external factors, but is instead driven by wisdom and compassion. Solitude is the doorway to this freedom, allowing us to transcend the limitations of our ego and to live more fully in harmony with the world around us. Conclusion: solitude as an integral part of the Buddhist path to realizing our true nature and living fully with ourselves. In the journey of the Buddhist path, solitude is not an escape from the world, but a profound means of transformation. It is through moments of solitude that we come to realize our true nature and our inherent connection to all things. In the quiet of our own company, we learn to listen deeply to the wisdom of our hearts and the still voice of our inner being. Solitude invites us to step away from the noise of the world and into a deeper relationship with ourselves. It helps us face our fears, our desires, and our attachments, and it teaches us how to let go of what no longer serves us. As we cultivate a deeper awareness of our thoughts, emotions, and actions, we begin to understand the impermanent nature of all things and the interconnectedness of life. Ultimately, the practice of solitude is about living fully and authentically. It is about being present with ourselves, accepting who we are in this very moment, and recognizing that our true nature is not separate from the world around us. It is through solitude that we come to understand the depth of our own wisdom and the vastness of our inner peace. When we embrace solitude as a part of our spiritual practice, we open ourselves to the possibility of living a life that is rich in insight, compassion, and freedom. In the end, the journey of enlightenment through solitude is about reconnecting with the essence of who we truly are. It is through this deep connection with ourselves that we can live a life that is fully alive, fully engaged, and fully at peace with the world. Embracing solitude for a fuller, more enlightened life. As we wrap up our exploration of solitude and its profound role in Buddhist philosophy, it's clear that solitude is far from being merely a state of being alone. It is, in fact, a powerful tool for self-discovery, spiritual awakening, and the cultivation of wisdom and compassion. Far from isolating us, solitude connects us to the deepest truths of our existence, revealing the impermanent nature of the world around us, and helping us see through the illusions of the ego and worldly attachments. Through solitude, we find space for the mind to calm and the heart to open. We create an opportunity to reflect on our life's purpose, deepen our understanding of suffering, and move closer to the liberation that Buddhism teaches. In that quiet space, we connect not only with our own true nature, but with all beings, recognizing our shared experience of suffering and joy. Living alone, far from being an act of separation, becomes an invitation to return to the essence of who we truly are. It is in this space of stillness that we can nurture the seeds of compassion, wisdom, and freedom, allowing us to live fully in the present moment and experience the peace that comes from letting go of our attachments and false notions of self. As the Buddhist teachings remind us, the path to true freedom is one of inner liberation. By embracing solitude, we not only deepen our connection with ourselves, but with all the interconnected beings around us. In this process, we begin to embody the true freedom that comes with letting go of attachments and living a life of mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. I invite you to reflect on the role that solitude plays in your own life. Can you embrace the quiet moments as opportunities for growth and self-discovery? By allowing yourself the time and space to simply be, without the distractions of the external world, you may find that solitude opens doors to profound transformation, bringing you closer to your true self and to a life of peace and fulfillment. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. If you found this episode insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who may benefit from these teachings. May you walk the path of solitude with courage and wisdom, and may your journey bring you ever closer to the peaceful, enlightened life you seek.